This is going to look like one of those corporate apology videos. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You're either on the bus or you're off the bus.
Welcome aboard, episode 51, the long-awaited, the much-anticipated, and far too long overdue episode of Ridin the Bus, the official Iowa Wild podcast presented by Central Iowa Pool and Spa, is finally on the way. I'm Ben Gislason, voice of the Iowa Wild, and it has been far too long since we've been sitting here, since I've been talking with you, since I've been getting to be in front of you on YouTube, or whether you're tuned in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, however you're tuned in. Thank you. And let's start with this, an apology. It's been far too long since we've had an episode, almost dating back to the beginning of the calendar year in 2025. I don't have a good excuse for you. I'm not going to pretend like I have all these great reasons why we didn't get to it. I think our fan base knows very well how overloaded the season can be in the American Hockey League for every staff member, myself included. The departure of my great co-host and pal Joey Goldstein didn't help in that. The team services side of a busy travel second half of the season didn't help in that. But here we are in June. And a heartfelt apology, because I do know people want to listen, people want to know, people want to dive into the Iowa Wild. They get a lot of their news from the Ridin the Bus podcast, and so let me be the first and only person to say my apologies for the delay. We won't have that again. We're looking forward to a great summer. We've got some good guests lined up. Things are going to look a little bit different. We experimented with a little bit there. Caden Bankier, Luke Toporowski, This Is Greatness, which actually got some great reviews from our fan base. Those guys obviously aren't around here in the summer, so we're going to keep it a little more simple as things move forward. You might not get as long of an intro. You might not get as long of an outro, which for some fans, they're probably thinking, thank goodness, get to the guest, which we're going to get to today. And what a better way to usher in this next era of the Ridin the Bus podcast, a new season, a new offseason, but by bringing in the head coach of the Iowa Wild, new head coach of the Iowa Wild, Greg Cronin. Obviously, that was the big news of the summer for Iowa. Brett McLean departing for the Vancouver Canucks to take over an assistant coaching job up there. We certainly wish Brett the best, and thanks for what he brought to the Iowa Wild organization over the last couple of seasons. And with that book closes and another one opens, and a great interview today and a great coach. There's no looking at his background and his pedigree any other way than a guy that wins. We'll get into more of that as we set up the stage for Greg and I's chat, which is a really, really enjoyable one. But a farewell to Brett, a hello to Greg Cronin, also the NHL draft this past weekend. As I record this today, we had Greg in earlier in the week, which is when we shot the interview, doing this little preamble now leading into the weekend of the 2025 NHL draft. One of the smaller NHL drafts for the Minnesota Wild in recent memory. They have just 4 picks, second round through sixth round, which that to me showcases a team that is trying to get in win-now mode. Usually the teams that are looking to really go for it, they aren't picking 3 to 4 times in the first round. They maybe don't even have a first-round pick. That's the case for Minnesota. They've dealt some of those to get pieces to put themselves in place to make a run. And there's a huge onus this offseason on the money that's coming back to Bill Guerin with the Zach Parise and Ryan Suter contracts now officially off the books. It's been like another Christmas, I think is maybe what Bill Guerin called it at one point this offseason, coming here in the form of, I think it's around $14 million in cap space. A lot of questions around Minnesota, what's going to happen with Marco Rossi. They've tried to re-sign him. They haven't been able to come to terms between his agent as well as Marco and then the team. Will he get traded? Could we see his departure? Will there be any Iowa Wild players that are involved in that trade? There's been some names that have been thrown around on social media that might get included in that. I'm not going to partake in any of that because I don't know anything when it comes to who might be headed out in a trade somewhere. But this all might be done by the time this podcast goes live early in the coming week after the NHL draft. So you might know before this recording knows what actually happened on draft day, because a lot of times that's when the big deals happen. Teams want to trade up. Maybe someone wants to get that second round pick of Minnesota. They throw that in with Marco, somebody else. It's been a hard question. A lot of people have asked me, what do you want to see happen? And it's tough because Marco has showcased so much. His growth has been incredible. We obviously love Marco from his time here in Iowa, some spectacular seasons he played here, his 2 years with the Iowa Wild. Hockey's a business. They need to make sure they get him at the right number. He wants more. Minnesota not willing to give him that. So then Bill Guerin has to say, well, we need a center, and we need somebody that can help us win right now. Minnesota has reached that point. It was an incredible playoff series against Vegas, a series that very well could have gone Minnesota's way, a couple of overtime losses, that one shot goes a different direction, and all of a sudden Minnesota's marching past what was a Stanley Cup contending Vegas Golden Knights team. Be excited about this Minnesota Wild squad. I am. I've always been excited about them. People say, yeah, you're paid by the team, Ben. You have to be. But this is an earnest excitement for this team. And I look at a club that is only a few pieces away now. Really, they are only a few pieces away from being a team that could very well contend to make a run in the playoffs. And we watched what Florida has done. We watched what the Edmonton Oilers have done. It's not easy to get to that level. But Minnesota, at least I left that Vegas series thinking they're not as far away as maybe I thought they were. So I'm excited to see what they do this offseason. Again, by the time this podcast comes out, we might actually know who that second-line center is. We'll have to wait and see. Greg Cronin, the man of the hour, the man of the week. Big shout out to Alec Lesnar, our PR manager, who did a terrific job of setting up what was a gauntlet media tour for him here in Des Moines earlier this week. Had him on WHO. KCCI was out here to get some coverage, our great friend of the program and of the organization. Shannon Earhart was here. We had coverage from WOI-TV. We got him on Sean Roberts with KXNO in the morning. Chris Williams, kind enough to have him on the Iowa Everywhere Podcast Network. So it was a busy 24 hours for Greg Cronin. That started with the fly into Minnesota to tour the TRIA practice facility up in St. Paul, as well as to tour XL and to tour, we'll wait to see what the XL is going to be called, because that's getting a name change, as is this building. It'll be the Casey Center officially here as soon as, I believe, July 1. So an au revoir to Wells Fargo Arena. I digress. Greg Cronin, an incredible background, almost a 600 winning percentage in just shy of 460 AHL games as a head coach, time in Bridgeport, time with the Colorado Eagles. I remember those Eagles teams my first few years in the league was when Cronin was in his second, third, fourth year with the Eagles, and boy, those were some remarkable series. I remember during the Tim Army era. Tim Army, Greg Cronin, very good friends. Tim was on Cronin's staff in Anaheim this past season. And so we get into that a little bit too in the interview. Tim told Greg a lot about Des Moines. We all know that Tim loves Des Moines and loves this city. And that was a big part, I think, for Greg of learning about the Wild, learning about the organization, learning about Des Moines, and eventually saying yes and getting a head coach with NHL head coaching experience. He was with the Anaheim Ducks for the last 2 seasons. I'm excited for Greg. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can bring to the organization. An incredible pedigree and really an incredible interview coming your way. Stay tuned late in it. He went to New Zealand for a stretch, and it's a really entertaining chat, a really fascinating guy, the new head coach of the Iowa Wild. Sit back and enjoy Greg Cronin. It is my great privilege now to introduce not only to the Ridin the Bus listeners, but also to the Minnesota Iowa Wild fan base, the new head coach of the Iowa Wild, Greg Cronin. Greg, with us in the flesh here in Des Moines. It's great to meet you. It's great to have you. I'm sure it's been a whirlwind 24 hours for you, flying into Minnesota, getting down here to Iowa, but it's wonderful to have you here in this seat, and cannot wait to see what the Greg Cronin era looks like in Des Moines. Welcome.
Thank you, Ben.
So let's walk through the last couple 24 hours for you. You fly in from the East Coast. You get to see Minnesota. You're down here in Iowa now. What's been taken in? What kind of stock have you taken in so far?
Well, I've actually been through Iowa and Minnesota quite a bit in my college coaching career. The USHL, I mean, one of the hallmark franchises in Des Moines. Remember that old Buccaneer Arena there?
Used to work there, know it well.
Yeah. Many games I sat in that building. I remember they used to have the USHL showcase. It would start off in September. And so I got to know Des Moines. Had spent some time, obviously, in Minnesota, particularly with the NHL trips into the St. Paul area. And I've enjoyed it. Like, it's interesting. I'm an East Coast guy, and there is definitely a different a different vibe in the Midwest than there is in the East Coast. I just was on the West Coast, which has a different vibe than they do on the East Coast and the Midwest. So, coming back here, I have to tell the fans and the listeners that there is a genuine authenticity to Midwestern people. I think it comes easy for them to smile. I think they're generally very happy, positive people. I was joking around with Matt Hendricks, like in the East Coast, it's very hard to get people to smile. You walk out the door, there's a little bit of like a fight or flight mentality.
Well, good. I'm glad you're already smiling on our podcast, so
yeah.
Step one.
Where I grew up, it was like, you come out the door and you're armed and ready to defend yourself, right? But I think there's just, to me, that's why they call it the heartland of America out here. It's just that I love the people here.
As I promised, I want to get a bus story. It's something we start all of our guests. Every guest we've had on this podcast starts with a bus story. Behind you, so many great programs, whether it's the NTDP, whether it's college hockey with Northeastern, whether it's your time in Bridgeport, a lot of time on the bus, I know, in Bridgeport, Colorado, probably more flights than anything there, but any great memorable bus stories, or I'll even say travel stories that come to mind in the illustrious career of Greg Cronin? Okay,
I'll just tell you one story, and it was in coaching the Colorado Eagles. It probably was like 4 or 5, 6 years ago. I don't remember. But our team president was on the road trip with us, and he had come into the building late, and he had his personal bag that was left on the loading dock in the arena that we were playing at. And we left the arena to take a 4-hour bus ride up north, and our equipment staff forgot to grab his personal bag. So about 2 hours into the drive north, he said, "Hey, Crow, I think my personal bag, I don't think was loaded on the bus." And I said, "Well, why are you waiting 2 hours to tell me that?" Right? So the bus pulls over, and sure enough, we make a call to the arena that we were at, and lo and behold, his personal gear was still on the loading dock. It was probably like an hour and a half later. It was probably not 2 hours. So the equipment staff from the opposing team raced up the highway to bring his personal bag, and they got pulled over and got a speeding ticket. So that had another 20 minutes to it. So and we had to play the next afternoon. We got in at like 3 in the morning. That was probably my most colorful bus story.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's amazing how many stories I've heard getting. It's one of my favorite questions because you hear all manner of different stories, and almost all of them have to do with delays, much like that one did as well. For you, Greg, I mentioned a little bit of your pedigree, obviously most recently National Hockey League head coach, an exceptional resume, an exceptional success rate in the American League level between Bridgeport, between Colorado, and almost a .600 winning percentage. You know how to win in this league. Pedigree, it's all there. So you're going to have suitors. You're going to have people that want you as a head coach. What about Iowa brought you to saying yes?
The staff. I mean, the Minnesota Wild staff, starting with Billy Guerin. I went through the interview process. Like I said before, I know Billy. I actually recruited him to go to the University of Maine in '88 or '89. I was a young GA back then. He was probably a few years younger than me. Ended up going to BC. And, it's like anything in life. When you grow up in certain areas, there's a network that's kind of built into those relationships. And although I didn't stay in touch with Billy, like one of the things that I'm really not real aggressive about is networking. I tend to be a little bit more introverted. I kind of stay in my lane. I focus on what I have to do. But there is a familiarity with people and players that you've interacted with in the past. And I watched Billy's career grow from a heck of a college hockey player at BC right into the NHL. John Hines kind of followed my footsteps. We started the U.S. National Training Program back in '96. We put the infrastructure together. It was myself and Jeff Jackson and Bob Mancini. Then we had our first full season in '97, '98. And we launched that program with a lot of controversy. I don't think there was a lot of people in USA Hockey that were happy with it because we were taking the best players out of their respective areas. And it was very parochial. They wanted to win. I understood it, but we were trying to create a new brand, a new culture for USA Hockey so they could win these World Juniors and World Cups and World Championships, which they've gone on to do. But long story short, we built that, and I left to go to the Islanders, and I think Heinze came in like 2 years later, and he worked his way into being a head coach there. So, and I remembered Heinze when he was at BU. So, those two guys I know well, and I know Jack Capuano more than anybody because Cappy and I both University of Maine products, me as a coach and him as a player. And then we coached together with the New York Islanders for 4 years. And Cappy's a terrific coach. We had 200-plus point seasons there. I remember clearly we had lost to Tampa Bay in the second round in 2 overtime games at home that we were leading with like a minute to go in both games that could have turned that series in our favor. They ended up going to the Stanley Cup Finals that year and losing. But anyways, Cappy's a terrific friend. He's a great person. And then last but not least, I got to know Matt Hendricks. I saw Matt as a player from the opposing bench. He personifies toughness, persistence. He's relentless, team guy. All those qualities came out clearly in the interview. Without ever having spoken to Matt, whether it was a formal or informal setting, he just really like glows with character. And I really enjoyed the connection. And I felt I could mesh with him. And it's important that when you're working with people, you have the same ideology or you have enough self-confidence that you can actually discuss things that could be divisive, but you build bridges between the conversations and strengthen it. And I really felt that chemistry with Matt.
Relentless, character, passionate, ways you're describing Matt. I would imagine ways you're going to describe coaching philosophies. You talk about John Hines, the camaraderie you guys have, and clearly an American League team is going to play similar systems. They're going to look similar to what the National League team looks like. But what can fans expect to see from the Iowa Wild? What are you going to operate as far as pillars? This team must do this. What are those things?
Well, it's going to start with standards, okay? You have to have standards anywhere you go. And then the standards have to have accountability or they're just hollow. Heinze and his staff are going to create the framework as that how we're going to play structurally, like how we're going to forecheck and break out. Those things are non-negotiables. You have to do the players service by giving them repetitions within those systems so when they do get called up, they're not thinking. They're just playing hockey within the same systems. And systems for your listeners, that's just like a mapping system. It gives the players direction where to go on the ice. And there's scenarios that come up every game. You know, I don't care if you're watching from the balcony, from like a drone view, or you're right by the glass. My style is that you create it's kind of a corny term in hockey because it's such a tough sport, but you try and create an intimacy with the players. So they understand if the first forward in the forecheck is going in, he's going in standard 100%. There's no negotiation. You're not water skiing down the forecheck. You're going as fast as you can, and you're using your stick to try and disrupt the play. And the intimacy and the connectivity comes when the second and third forecheckers can read his speed and his aggressiveness, and they can actually see like how he's weaponized himself to kill the defenseman. And I'm big into details, and that language has to become a natural part of the team's personality. And you know, whatever we're doing, that's the marching orders from the Minnesota Wild. We will definitely march in that direction. And my core strengths as a coach is to get the players to play as hard as they can. And I always say you have to bring your brain to the battle. You can skate as hard as you want, but if you don't arrive in the battle with, you know, a proper stick or a good angle, you're going to get beat. At the end of the day, you have to get pucks back. So again, these are all kind of cliche things, but you have to hunt pucks and you have to have speed when you hunt them. So you got to play fast. You got to play connected, which creates the synergy in how you forecheck or backcheck. Then you got to be tough to play against defensively, and that starts with killing plays. Like you got to stop progression along the walls. Then you got to have forwards that are going to come out and be willing to block shots. So if you take all those events and you create standards, the question is, well, how do you get them to do it over and over again? And that becomes the reliability part of it. Like players have to become so confident in what they're doing that they become reliable. And when you have that reliability, I think everybody plays faster. You think faster, you skate faster, you can predict where things are going to happen. It's a process. It takes time. So, you know, you're not going to come in here and, you know, in 1 week and everything's going to just shift the way you want it to. You've got to be reasonable about it. And I know we're going to talk about this, but it took, I would say it took a good 120 games in Anaheim before you could just see it click.
Anaheim. Excellent segue. Broadcasters love when their interviewees lead us into the next question. Yeah. Kudos to you. I wanted to touch on it because when your name first came up, the first thing I thought about was, okay, well, what are the parallels? How does his experience, his background, and like I've said, the American League success speaks for itself, but also the weird wrinkle to the American Hockey League is winning is important, but development is just as, and in some organizations, it's even more important. So there's an intertwining of the two, and it can be hard to both win and develop. But I look at Anaheim, you dig into some of the numbers there, and you think about the prospects that you saw under your tutelage take massive steps, whether it's Mason McTavish, whether it's Lucas Dostal in goal, whether it's Olin Zellweger, who I remember from a season ago in San Diego, jumping up. He played some huge minutes for you guys at times. But then you also had the 21-point jump from year 1 to year 2. So you were able to do a little bit of that. Can they be intertwined, and how can they be intertwined, winning and developing?
First of all, they had to be intertwined in Anaheim. We had no choice, okay? So, like last year, we had 11 players that were born in 2000 and earlier. So that's in the NHL. You won't, you'll get probably, 75% of your players in the AHL will have that distinction. But that's a very unusual situation. And the year before that, we had some crazy number of guys that were born. It was like 2003 and younger, like 6 or 7 guys that probably should have been in the AHL in a normal environment.
It's like you're operating a high school.
Yes. And then the one thing that happened was we had a large group of players that were like over 30 and a larger group that were below 23. And there was just a few guys in the middle, like the Troy Terrys were in the middle. And so in that process, okay, so you go back to, I like to try to talk about facts and not, procrastination or whatever you want to use as a word, like kind of illusionary things. Anytime you're changing a culture, okay, so that was a massive culture change there. You're getting the majority of the players, you're encouraging them, you're coaching them to do things they haven't done before. So whenever you do that with a team, there's going to be, I think in humans in general, there's a natural reaction to get defensive and to push back, okay? And this is one of the crazy things about sports. I actually had a really, really good breakfast this morning with Aaron Bogosian, who's Zach's brother. Aaron's a consummate warrior. He's in our sports psychology group now, and we were talking about this. And obviously, it's a massive physical battle, and it's also the mental endurance. So, those things correlate. And when you are trying to get people to do things they don't want to do, there's a bit of a resistance. And our goal as coaches is to make sure that they understand what our vision is for them, how to maximize their potential. And they have to own part of that journey. As a coach, if you're consistent with the messaging and you have the conviction to hold them accountable to it, you may piss some people off. But once they get through that pain, okay, because it is painful when you have to push through things you don't want to do, once they got through it, you could see their game would change. Like, I give you an example, like Trevor Zegras. Anybody that watched him up until last year would never think he would get a 3-game suspension for elbowing. Okay, so he wasn't a physical player. But for me, the elbow and the physicality that went along with it was symbolic of a kid that embraced the change. He became a better defensive player. And you can't play in the NHL if you're just going to be a one-way player. You have to play defense and offense. So I think as a group, I think our whole team grew. And then, like I said, by about game 40 last year, we took off.
Head coach in the NHL, head coach in the AHL. How does it differ, and how does it stay the same?
Well, I think that your principles. I always say it's principles and standards over personalities and egos. They have to stay consistent, right? I really don't. I don't think they're any different. I mean, you're trying to motivate players to be the best version of themselves. Like I said, the NHL is a different athlete, so you got to learn different ways to send a message. Just because the American Hockey League does have those external motivations with the lottery ticket to the NHL and the Tiger chasing them from behind, so I think you've got a little bit more of an internal drive there. The NHL athlete's just different. They have to be talked to differently. I learned that my second year. My first year, I was probably too much of the Tiger, and they probably got sick of me. In the second year, I kind of downshifted, and what we did in the NHL, I think that made the messaging a little bit firmer, was we took the coaches out of it, and we had the leadership group that we designed. It was Killorn, Strome, Trouba, and Gudis, and they were able to deliver a message to the whole group. So it became more of a collaboration. They took ownership of it. I think that really helped accelerate the development of the young guys.
Your career is one of hard work. It doesn't take a long time on Elite Prospects or Hockey DB to figure that out. A player at Colby College, small liberal arts school out in Maine, then coaching there, moving along the ranks, and not kicking down doors on your way to the National Hockey League. What is the thing that you think, if people look at your career, would pull most from it? What is the thing that you've pulled most from it that's helped you get to where you're at now, and the exceptional career that you've already built yourself?
I think I'm very honest, and I'm passionate about promoting growth in people and players, and I think I'm very consistent with the messaging. So you go back to like just facts, and I was going through this in the interview process, and in the 5 years I was in Colorado, we had 30 players move on to the NHL, which is a historical number. And we were doing it in an organization that was a perennial Stanley Cup contender, not just a playoff contender, a Stanley Cup winning contender. So there wasn't a lot of opportunities for the guys on the Eagles. And I look back at Logan O'Connor, who was an undrafted free agent signing out of Denver, who was a second or third line player in Denver, that had the requisite drive, that listened intently about the details, that saw weaknesses in his game, that the coaches shared with him. I had a great coaching staff, and we worked these kids, and they were really invested in their own future. It was Logan O'Connor, Pavel Francouz, A.J. Greer just won a Stanley Cup. Ryan Graves went on to New Jersey in a trade. Nick Maloche played in San Jose. So a lot of them couldn't break the Avalanche lineup because they were so good. So they were, our job as coaches is to create assets, whether they're for Wild or some other team that they can use as trade value. And we just kept spitting these players out every year. And I think that comes from having a process, having the coaches be really confident the process is going to translate for the player, and then creating that camaraderie with the players so that they know that we're invested in them as people and as players, and that creates a better teamwork.
What do you make of the current pieces that you'll have coming into Iowa Wild camp, guys that are, whether they're going to be pushing for Minnesota, whether they're going to be pushing to stay here in Iowa? What do you know about the group? What have the discussions with Matt Hendricks been like, and what are some of your initial thoughts about what Iowa Wild players team will look like going into next season, and how you can factor in and, again, elevate all those guys?
So, Ben, I don't really know much about the team. I got to be honest with you. I watched some video, and I try to be respectful of what went on here with the coaching staff. So I always try and just watch it as though I'm a spectator. I don't know the talent level in terms of how it is in relationship to the other teams in the league. I think Brett and his staff did obviously a great job. They're coaching the American Hockey League, and I think have prospects and be able to push people up. It goes back all the way to when Tim Yami was here. I know when I saw Rossi and Boldy and those guys that came through here, they were dynamite AHL players. Some of these kids are a little bit younger than that, so they're trying to get to that level where they're going to be automatic call-ups. But in terms of like lineups and where they project to be Wild players or Minnesota Wild players, or they need another year or two here, I couldn't tell you. I have to get on the ice with them and watch them. But I do know that our job, like I said, the same job we had in Colorado, is to make these players the best version of themselves.
I got to bring up Tim. I know you guys are tight. A lot of fans loved the Tim Army years here, and I know that he was a big part of your sounding board when you were in the interview discussion. What has he told you about Des Moines? What has he told you about the area? What do you know about the area of Des Moines? Because if there's one thing I know about Tim Army, he loves the city.
Yeah, Tim loves it here, and I've known Tim. We've been coaching against each other since 1987, I think. So every time I'd see Tim, we'd have long conversations. I used to call him all the time when I was driving from Boston to Colorado. As I neared Iowa, I would think about Tim, so I called Tim. We'd catch up and talk for an hour on the phone. Obviously, have enough respect for him that I hired him to be an assistant coach with me, and he did a terrific job last year. He loves Des Moines. Like, I thought it was, okay, here's a guy from Providence that's been all over these NHL cities, and he loved Des Moines. Just like, how Tim is. He's like rapid fire. I love that place. Him and Sue loved it. His wife Sue, and they had a blast here. They genuinely loved it. And, I've talked to a lot of people, like John Hill's a good friend of mine. He's living in Des Moines right now. He's a scout for Edmonton Oilers. He coached in the USHL. He coached at Minnesota and in the Gophers, and he coached at Colorado College. And he's been here for I don't know how many years. He loves it here. Like everybody I talk to loves Des Moines. And I'm, like I said to start the podcast, I'm a Boston guy. Des Moines is a small city, but it's got that Midwestern charm. And I'm really looking forward to moving here.
Let's finish with a couple of somewhat Boston-related questions. One really Boston-centric question. One, let's harken back to true or false. You get done with your time at Colby College and spent some time in New Zealand?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? You might be the only NHL head coach to have called New Zealand home at one point.
You did some digging here.
I'm a journalist. That's what we do. Turn over some stones.
Yeah. So there's a story behind that, but I got out of college just like a lot of college kids. I get out, and where I grew up, it was a real Irish Catholic neighborhood, and I didn't really have a lot of like role models that were like into like Colby College graduate work, right? Like Colby College, they call a small Ivy school, and I just didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I think a lot of college kids get out of school in the liberal arts environment. They're like, oh boy, now what? Life hits you right between the eyes. And I was working construction with my cousins. A lot of my cousins in the city had construction businesses and kind of blue-collar jobs. And I remember I was in Cambridge working on a historical house in East Cambridge. It was painted with lead paint, and I was scraping it with a carbon scraper. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing this work for? And I went over to the head of the Charles Regatta. And for you, if anybody that listens or likes boats, they have a rowing race in the head of the Charles in Harvard there, and it's very similar to the boat they have in England on the Thames. So long story short, I heard these guys, they were sitting around drinking beers outside talking about they had gone to New Zealand, and I'm like, New Zealand? I didn't know what the heck it was. This is before cell phones, right? So for some reason, it like opened a door up in my brain. I'm like, that's my escape. I'm going to go to New Zealand and I'm going to find myself, So you can remember, this is back in '86, right? I didn't have a credit card. I had 8 $100 bills in my pocket. I bought the ticket with a credit card, and I went from Boston to L.A. My uncle was out there in San Clemente. Then I went to Hawaii, Tahiti, New Zealand, and then Australia. But I had to work everywhere I went. So I went out there, and I was scared, like you travel by yourself. And, they all spoke English, so I wasn't kind of lost language-wise. But I did it because I wanted to find out how I'd hold up, And I wanted to do, like, seriously, people that have traveled alone and listening, you'll identify with this. It's the journey. You end up taking a journey through yourself because you find your resiliency, your resourcefulness, what your fear is. And you literally have to conquer your own weaknesses. And I did that. I lasted, I think it was 7 months.
No kidding.
Yeah. I was in New Zealand for 3 months. I worked in a sheep farm, worked in boat yards. I was in Australia working in construction sites. I was sleeping on park benches. Yeah, it's a crazy trip. I should probably write like a small book about it. But yeah, it was an incredible journey. And then I got back. I think I left in like October, and I came back sometime in the end of April or May. And then I was like, okay, I'm back to what I was doing before. I'm scraping lead paint off houses again. And then I went up to Colby and I started coaching, and that's what launched my career.
We do highlights for all these interviews where we snip a little bit and put it out on social as a teaser. Abby, you can check that story, and we'll be making sure to put that one out there. Yeah. We don't get that profound on this podcast that often, and dare I say that was one of the most profound answers. Let's go to something trivial to finish. South Boston, an iconic area for our country's history. Yeah. Also, there's an incredible amount of iconic Boston movies.
Yeah.
Do you have one that you think is the epitome of this represents Boston?
Yeah, my father was from South Boston, and we lived in Arlington growing up as kids, and but we had relatives. They were over there quite a bit as kids. My grandfather still had a property in G Street, so you listen as just to connect my personal history to South Boston. in the movie that Johnny Depp was in. It was Black Mass. If people remember the movie, the bus pulled up, and it was about the busing in Boston, and they were busing black kids into the city and different neighborhoods, and white kids were going to different black neighborhoods, and they were trying to break segregation. It was a desegregation movement by Judge Garrity, and the woman comes out in this bathrobe and she's chucking bottles at the buses, and it's the start of the movie, and it's like, this is crazy. Well, that house that she was at, that row of brownstones was our family home. So it's when you looked at it, I was like, oh my God, because it's right across from South Boston High School. But I do think the story that I felt resonated with me was The Town with Ben Affleck. And that was number one. The Departed was great and all that stuff, but The Town was number one in terms of entertainment. And Mystic River was number two with Timothy Robbins and Sean Penn. Those two movies are great movies. Just for me as a Bostonian growing up and looking at those movies through the lenses of the neighborhoods that I hung out in, they were pretty authentic, I felt.
It's a question I've never got to ask a true blue Bostonian, so I'm glad I finally got to ask it, and really glad to have you here, glad to have this conversation. Thanks for giving us some time tonight. Enjoy dinner. I know it's going to be delicious where you're headed, and let me be one of the first to say we cannot wait to see what this era looks like with you here, and can't wait to work with you. Thanks again.
Thank you again.
I'll say it again. Someone has to fact check that. Has there ever been a head coach in the National Hockey League who has, not only lived in New Zealand, but herded sheep in New Zealand? He's got to be one of one. Again, thanks to Greg he had a busy day and a half here in Des Moines, and carved out a good 30 minutes there to sit down and chat with me. And there's a lot to look at and a lot to like for Iowa Wild fans coming into this season. And one thing that really jumped out to me in one of the press conferences that we had down here in Des Moines was winning has to be paired with development. And that's something that has to be intertwined. We talked about it with Greg in that podcast and that interview, and you have to have that intertwined winning and development. You can't have one or the other. Doesn't mean that you're going to win the Calder Cup, but it's hard to do both. And if you just develop, you can't let winning slip. And if you just want to win, you can't let development slip. And that's something that for someone who's going to be in the trenches like we're going to be as a staff, we're excited about it. Fans should be excited about it too. We'll have more episodes coming your way all summer long. Should be a pretty similar setup to this. We might try to get a couple live co-hosts in here at some point just to freshen it up a little bit. But if you have guests you want to hear from, if you have ideas, things that you want to see us do on the Ridin the Bus podcast, please let us know. And thanks as well to Central Iowa Pool and Spa for sponsoring our podcast here this season. Plenty ahead. Development camp, we'll have some coverage up there from when the Minnesota Wild get all their prospects in. We'll see some of these new prospects that were drafted by the Minnesota Wild this past weekend. It's crazy. We're already headed towards the 4th of July. Summer's already almost halfway over, if you want to count it like that. The offseason, at least, already almost halfway over. But hope you're all doing well. Looking forward to seeing some of you. The summer block party will be coming up as well later on this summer. So stay tuned for more on that. Head to our social media sites or our website, iowawild.com, to learn more about how you can join us at the summer block party. And as always, a big thank you to Abby Kimball and to all of you for joining us. This has been episode 51 of Ridin the Bus, the official Iowa Wild podcast. Until we set the wheels in motion again down the road, I'm Ben Gislason, and 2 honks for the win.